When I first saw Baba House, it was very atmospheric. It was in pretty bad shape, very dilapidated. But that created a kind of very mysterious, exciting atmosphere for me because it might have been so full of guano everywhere, but you could see the details were just exceptional.
Every time I come back to Baba House, I look at different parts of the house. I look at different decorations, for example, and through those decorations, I seem to understand where they come from. And it's not very common because a lot of large buildings, the interiors are almost like scraped off. And so the memory can only come from pictures, from oral interviews. But this house really exemplified that culture physically.
It reminded me of the scene from that classic black and white film, Great Expectations. You had stepped into Miss Havisham's abandoned wedding banquet. It was that feeling, everything had just stopped. And I never thought that there was a chance for a house of this quality and intactness to have survived in Singapore. I was so moved. I couldn't believe it.
The NUS Baba House is the only authentic Peranakan house open to the public in Singapore. Built around 1895, it was once the ancestral home of a Peranakan Chinese family until NUS acquired it in 2006. Today, it stands as one of the last vestiges of Peranakan culture at its height, and every detail is carefully considered, from its curatorial intent to conservation.
Well, one of the things that I was really excited to create for Baba House was the place being a theatre of memory. It could provide a space where we could tell the story about the family and also Peranakan culture. How Baba House, I think, is able to connect to visitors is the way it provides this opportunity for people to really step into this kind of environment. It's not just about the architecture, it's the experience of the air, the way the air moves in the house. It's picking up little details. It's a combination of so many different things that come together and give you the experience.
The decision was made to restore the house to how it looked around 1928, where the house was at its most resplendent at the height of the family's fortunes. The initial restoration was completed in 2008, but that was only the beginning.
Firstly, I accept and celebrate the fact that the house is living and changing every day. I love the fact that it's never just one thing. So the walls start to deteriorate and it becomes an opportunity for research in terms of how materials change over time and that sort of things. And I feel when it's a living house, we have to accept that these things will start to happen. Naturally, we have to take some care in terms of not, destroying it. But I think there should be an acceptable limit of how the house is used so that we don't, sort of petrify it into this dead object. It needs to age. It needs to have this element of life and use and the effect of rain, light, people. So the house should just, age gracefully and we should accept it. One of the main challenges would be to keep to the idea of authenticity and academic rigor. We have to think of these things in the context of the aging of the house, budgets, the capabilities at every point in time. When we think or plan or try and conceptualize a historical house like this, it can never be an ideal. We have to look at so many problems and deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So in some cases, we can take a more pure conservation approach, but in other cases, because either we've lost the ability to restore it to such an extent, the restoration might actually damage the original artwork.
I think Singapore already has a very strong program of built heritage conservation run by URA, so there are more than 7,200 conserved buildings in Singapore. But there are still challenges and many ways in which that practice of conservation needs to be refined and improved on. So one aspect would be in the maintenance of users of these conservation buildings.
With many parts of the Baba House being exposed to the elements, maintenance work has to be done regularly, from the roof canopy, to the boundary plaster wall and gate, to the jianyan that gives Baba House its distinct beauty. The conservation work requires skills, knowledge, and the right materials. However, sometimes finding the required skill set and materials needed may not be so easy today.
First of all, an awareness of the value of built heritage that they own or use, and then from there the awareness leads to putting in the effort to take care of it in a way that helps to maintain the historical values of the building. So that's just kind of at a very micro level. But in terms of conservation policy and planning in Singapore, there are issues at a different level.
I think in Singapore there are several levels of conservation efforts that we put in. Some might be at a very high level about our national monuments, like the City Hall, the Supreme Court, the cathedrals, and so on. But I think apart from some of these buildings, there are other concerns like modern architecture, Dakota Crescents, for example, and there are, say, industrial heritage that we seems to forget, such as the Golden Mile complex. That project probably it's very hard to get the society to buy in, and it's also very difficult for the owner to forego the profits they might get from selling their houses or their units in the name of conservation. In that sense, we need the society to buy in, and that aspect I think we are still a long way. We are not proud of our heritage, and therefore we need to work with the public, with the community, to be proud of this heritage and to call them our own, that define us, to define our nationhood and to define our identity.
I think very often there are still sectors of society who views natural heritage, culture and history as obstacles to development, when actually we should be seeing these key aspects of our country as foundation stones and resources to create a sustainable, dynamic, relevant city for our citizens. So I think the way forward would be, how do we do more of this? How do we engage the local residents more? And how do we use the built heritage assets as an educational platform for building owners and also as a cultural resource for the wider community? Within the constraints of Singapore's limited land, it will be very difficult to conserve many more buildings. We just don't have enough land. So what should we do? I think that one key strategy would be to make better use of our already conserved building stock and to find different ways of teasing out their inherent history, heritage and cultural values to sustain and to build new intangible cultural connections. So for example, the Baba House where we're in, right? What this house demonstrates is, well, at one level, physical conservation, but the very fact is now an open house, a house for anyone to come in and to see and enjoy, has made this house so much more valuable to Singapore than if it was just a private residence. And it's not just about the past, it's about the future. All culture evolves and changes, right? So the work of the Baba House in terms of exploring what is Singaporean Peranakan Chinese culture, regional cultures, or even the bigger issue of hybridization will be a very important part of the ongoing creation of the Singapore identity.
What enables us to have connections with these buildings are really the people that once inhabited them, the uses that were there, all the intangible dimensions to the built space. I think it's time to really remember that every space has a story, and those stories are told by people. And they're the custodians of our heritage. They're the bearers of our intangible heritage.
My concern for the future of the Baba House probably rests in the educational aspect of the house. How can we use the house to interest our younger generations in terms of our history, in terms of our past, in terms of our identity, and in terms of our, say, conservation efforts? I think we should go deeper, go into greater depth to understand the history, but also the iconography of the house, as well as the conservation technique that the house will bring. This is part of the education process, and my take is that Baba House can play a very important role. I mean, one of its kind. There's nowhere else you can find such a concentration of Peranakan culture in Singapore.
I think it's important for Singaporeans of all backgrounds to find a personal relationship with the built heritage that we have protected for the future. People should not feel that our built heritage is divided into, I would say, different communities' heritage. If we can do that, and if each generation can find its own place in the built heritage environment and to make own memories, then I think they will continue to support the conservation program, to work with building owners and the wider community to restore well, maintain well, use well, and build up many, many happy memories for the future Singapore. I think that will really safeguard the conservation program for years to come.